Hello, in this recording I'm going to talk about verbs. In English we've got two groups of verbs, main verbs and auxiliary verbs. Most verbs are main verbs. They're verbs like walk and eat, think, appear, resemble. There are thousands of them, and the class of main verbs is actually an open class. That means that we can add new verbs to the class as we need them. So for example, with all the new technology coming in, we've invented new verbs and added them to the group of main verbs. So verbs like to text or to email, that kind of thing. The other group of verbs is a very small closed class of verbs, and they're called auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs, the word auxiliary indicates that they're helping verbs. They help to give a particular meaning to the sentence, and we'll see in next week. We'll talk about auxiliary verbs in a lot more detail. They include two subgroups, what are called primary auxiliaries and modal verbs, but we'll come back to them. Okay, what is the definition of a main verb? Well, the kind of definition that you were taught in school, if you were taught about verbs at all, would be something like main verbs are doing words. But what I've already said is that actually there are a lot of verbs that are not doing words. So if you take something like resemble, you can say John resembles Bill. Now there's nothing that John is doing, but resemble is still a verb. So that's not a good definition, and please get it out of your head. A different way to think about verbs is that when you've got something like resemble, you can say resemble or resembles or resembling or resembled. And that's what we find with most main verbs, that they can occur with all kinds of different inflectional forms. That means different endings. So that's a good definition of a verb, of a main verb, is to say that main verbs occur with different inflectional forms. So a verb that we can use as an example, because it does take different endings for all the different things you can do with it, is a verb like to show. So you can have show by itself, as in Sue can show the picture, and she wants to show it. To show is the full infinitive form. Paul shows with an S, and that's the present tense. John showed with ed, and that's the past tense. Anne is showing, we've got this ing form, and Carla has shown, which is an N, showing it's a participle. So all main verbs and some auxiliaries occur with different inflectional forms. That's these different endings shown here. Okay, now in this recording I'm just going to talk about finite forms of verbs. You've got finite forms and non-finite forms. There will be a separate recording on non-finite forms. Finite forms in English, there are only two, and that's the two tenses, present tense and past tense. And although we can talk about the future in English, we don't actually have a future tense. That means that there isn't a separate form in English that indicates that we're talking about the future. Of course, we can talk about the future, but we don't have a form of a verb that shows future. Okay, so we've got these finite forms of verbs. So where do they occur? Well, every sentence needs tense, and so every sentence is going to have a finite verb. And that means that if there's only one verb, it must be finite. So it must either be present or past. Now, present doesn't mean now. So it's not talking about what's actually happening at the moment. So even though swim in the following example is a present tense verb, we wouldn't say I swim at this moment. If we wanted to say that, we would say I am swimming at this moment. So present tense is a grammatical form, and it's not used to talk about what's happening at this very moment, but rather it's used to express a sort of general time, to talk about actions and situations which happen repeatedly or go on over time. So what you can do is say, I swim every day. Yeah, so this is something that is a habit of yours, you do it every day, and to express that you actually use this present tense. So if you look at the sentence, I am swimming at this moment, there is a present tense verb there, but it's actually the am form. That is, am is present for to go with I, and it comes from the verb to be. Okay, now if you look, we can use the present tense or another form to have slightly different effects. So what's the difference between these sentences? We live in Hertfordshire, we are living in Hertfordshire. When would you use one and not the other? Think about it for a moment. Yeah. Now, really what we can say is that when you live in Hertfordshire, you were born here, you've always lived here, you would just say we live in Hertfordshire. Yeah? But if you've just moved here and you're just here temporarily, you would say we are living in Hertfordshire. Yeah? So you're saying at this very moment we are living in Hertfordshire, but by using this form you are actually implying that that's not a permanent state of being, yeah, that it's only temporarily. Whereas if you say we live in Hertfordshire, you're saying, well, that's, you know, that's where we live, that's where we will live, that's where we have lived. Yeah, so that's a difference. Now, there's one exception to using the present to talk about what's actually happening at this moment, and that's when you get something like this. Yeah, Owen passes the ball to Beckham, he shoots but it misses. Oh, there comes Rooney, he heads the ball back to Beckham, he kicks, it's a goal. Yeah. Now, in sports commentating, because the action's happening so quickly, the commentator has to talk really fast, and so it's easier to say he passes the ball rather than he is passing the ball, which takes longer. So in sports commentating you find people use the simple present tense to express what's happening at the moment, but that's a real exception. Okay, well, what does the present tense look like? Well, to find what it looks like, start with the whole verb, that's called the full infinitive, so something like to walk, to think, to talk, to dance. And the form of the present tense is really simple, you just have the verb without that to. So you get I walk, you think, we talk, they dance. Now there's one exception, and that's when you're talking, when the subject, yeah, the person who's doing it or who is in a particular situation, yeah, is a third person singular subject. Yeah, so in terms of pronouns, that's he, she, or it, yeah, or any other thing that's not first person I or second person you. Yeah. In that case, we get an S at the end of the verb. So you get he walks, she thinks, the woman talks, Bill dances. Yeah. For all the other forms, for all the other sort of subjects, you just get the verb third person singular present tense, you get an S at the end. Past tense is normally used to refer to actions and events that took place in the past and that are finished. So something like yesterday, that sets the scene when it was. I arrived 2 hours late. Yeah? I slept for 4 hours last night. When I was little, we went abroad every year. Yeah? So there's a time in the past and something happened. What does the past tense look like? Well, that depends on whether the verb is a regular verb or an irregular verb. And when the verb is a regular verb, you get an ED or sometimes a D in writing. Yeah, so you get walk, walked. Yeah, you write that with ED. She talk, talked, or dance, Alice danced. You also have these irregular verbs. And they're called irregular because you can't actually predict what the past tense form is going to look like. So if you think about think, yeah, the past tense is not thinked, but rather you thought. Yeah, know, the past tense is not knowed, but Mary knew. Swim, we get swam, Paul swam. Yeah, so these are all irregular verbs. Okay, think about consider. Is that a regular verb or an irregular verb? Well, you know, you can say yesterday he considered, and you get ed at the end, so it's in fact a regular verb. Yeah. Is read a regular verb? Well, yesterday Mary read. Yeah, so it's not readed, so it's not a regular verb. What is the most irregular verb in English? Now here are a few examples of irregular verbs. Let's have a look. If you take to have, you would say I have, he has, we had, they had. So you've got three different forms. Here you've got have and has for present and had for past. How about go? Well, you've got I go, he goes, we went. Yeah, so you've got go and goes for present and went for past. How about put? Well, put you get I put, he puts, so two forms for present. What about past? Well, you get we put. Yeah. Yesterday we put, yesterday I put. So you've got the same form for past as you have for present. How about to be? Well, we find I am, you are, he is. So there are three different forms for the present, and then I was and we were. So also two forms for the past. So we find that the verb to be is really the most irregular verb in English, with 5 different forms for present and past. Just to recap, if there is only one verb in a sentence, that verb is going to be the finite verb. That means that it's got tense. Yeah, so if we've got a sentence like Wendy walked to the shop, yeah, there's one verb, walked, so that must be tensed. And in this case, you've got the ed ending indicating that it's past tense. If there's more than one verb in a sentence, the leftmost one is the finite verb. So if you've got something like Bill is talking with his mate, there are 2 verbs. You've got is and you've got talking. So is going to be the finite verb, the tensed verb. And it's is, so that's the present, the third person singular present tense form of to be. So what you've got then, John walked, went to the shop. You've got 2 verbs, walked and went, and that's not possible in this construction because walked is the past tense form of walk and went is the past tense form of go, and you can't have 2 tensed verbs next to each other in a sentence like this. So that makes the sentence ungrammatical, and that's indicated by that star. Yeah, that means that it's ungrammatical. Okay, now look at these sentences, a few more to look at. John has bought a bicycle. There are 2 verbs here, has and bought. So the left one must be finite, and that's has. Yeah, and that's present tense, the present tense form of to have. Mary is impressed by it. Again, 2 verbs, is and impressed. The finite one is the leftmost one, so that's is, and that's present, because is the present form of to be. She wants to have a scooter. Again, 2 verbs, wants and to have. The finite one is wants because it's on the left, and it is present. It's got that third person singular present s. Yeah, that is much cooler. There's only one verb, is, so is the finite verb, and again it is present. John doesn't agree. Yeah, there's two verbs here. Doesn't must be the finite one. Is it present or past? Well, doesn't, if you try and change the tense on it, you get didn't. Now, yesterday John didn't agree. Today he doesn't agree, so doesn't is present. And he wouldn't be seen dead on a scooter. Here you've got three verbs, would and be and seen. The leftmost one must be the tensed one, and that's would. And that's one of these modal verbs. And would as a modal verb is considered past, with the present form being will. Sometimes it's not that clear whether a verb form is present or past, and you can do a test for it but that we've just tried. You can try changing the tense, and if you can change the tense, then the verb must be finite. If you can't, then it's not finite. Now, to help you, you can try out these sort of frames and stick your sentence in here, but you have to be careful because it doesn't always work. But if it works, then you've got a good indication that you're dealing with either a present form or a past form. Yeah, so for present you could say every day this happens and then say what it is, or every day this is the case, which you would need if the verb is not actually a doing, doesn't express an activity, something that is being done. And then for the past you can say yesterday and then stick in the sentence. So let's have a go. Yeah. John drank a coffee at 11 o'clock. So could you say every day this happens, John drank a coffee at 11 o'clock? Well, that doesn't work, because then, so if you try yesterday, that works. Yesterday John drank a coffee at 11 o'clock, so drank must be past. She was late for class. Every day this happens, or this is the case. She was late for class. Well, no, that's then not that it is the case. It was the case. So let's try it with yesterday. Yesterday she was late for class. That works. So what was is again past. How about this one? She meets her friend after work. Every day she meets, this happens, she meets her friend after work. That works, so meets is present. And what would be past? Well, if you change it, yesterday she met her friend after work. So it's an irregular verb with met as the past tense. Now, there are some tricky structures to watch out for. So if you've got something like John has bought a bicycle, has is actually present tense. But if you think about the event, John has bought a bicycle, it's already happened. Yeah, so the actual event is in the past, but the way we talk about it is using present tense. And that really goes to show that tense is a grammatical notion, not a real world time. Yeah, so keep that in mind. If you've got John has bought a bicycle, then has is present. Past would be John had bought a bicycle. The other thing is something like this. That is much cooler. Yeah, where you've got this copula to be is with an adjective. Yeah, so you could say something like every day. This is the case. That is much cooler. That's okay. It sounds a bit odd, but again, keep in mind that is the third person singular present form of to be, and the past would be that was much cooler. Okay.